So we've got a simple platform game on Game Maker Studio. So this is the room designer. So this is what the room will look like when the user is playing it. So we've got a landscape view, and we've got 3 layers. One is the background layer, which is the blue sky, and then we've got the instance layer, which is for the player object and other objects, and then we've got the what we call the ground solid objects. This is instances 1. So you can see you can hide and unhide these, which can help with the designing process. So what you can do in a room designer is you can position objects. You can also assign values to the names, so you can choose different names for the layers. You can set up views as well. So if we have a look at the left hand side section, we've got viewports and cameras. Now viewports and cameras by default are not enabled, so you'd have to enable them here. And then you can set up here up to 7 viewports. Each viewport has got its own camera and viewport. So if you wanted to, you could just create a small viewport or a camera here, so it's more zoomed in. So we could try this now. Enable the viewports, make it visible, so you can see this white rectangle, and then you can position the X and Y position and also the width and height. So what we setting now is the area in the room, and then the camera size, so what we're going to see on the device's screen. So we're starting at 0, 0. We could reduce the width to something like 720. So as you can see, the rectangle has become smaller here. So this is what the user will see on their screen. And the height is 760. We can reduce the height to something like 400. And then we can then position it in the right place. So we'd have to move the Y position down. So let's have a look. The total room height is 768. So just pull out the calculator. We just do 768 minus what the height of the viewport is, which is 400. So it's 368. So we could just set the Y position as 368. And then that would basically put a player in the view. Okay. So what this would now do is it would zoom in into the actual room, but on the screen it would actually be 1336768. So what you would see is like a larger zoomed in view of the actual room on the screen, which could be useful if you like want to hide things off the screen. The next thing is object following. So we've got one object in the room, which is this one here. We can then follow it. So what this means is that if the player object moves off the screen, the viewport will automatically follow it. So we click on viewports and cameras, select the first viewport, and then go to object following, and then final object, which is player. So now it's set to object following player. Now these variables here, these define how to follow it. So we've got a horizontal border of 32. So as soon as this player object reaches 32 pixels near the boundary of this viewport, the viewport will then automatically adjust and follow it accordingly. Normally we just leave the speed like this. So we want to increase it to 100. and 100. So as soon as the player gets 100 pixels near the boundary of the viewport will then adjust accordingly. So that's basically done there with the viewports. There are other things like backgrounds. At the moment we've set a background color. You can change the color of the background. So you know, if you're using simple colors, you could define night and day in the game. So this could be like night time. So let's leave it like this for the time being. We've got nighttime environment. There are more advanced features here, such as filters and effects, but I'm not really going to go into those right now. So that's the basic room design done. What you can now do is you can duplicate this room, which you can see here. So this is room 1. You can just right click here and click on duplicate. So now we've got a room, rename it to room 2. Now each room could be like a different level. So that's room 1, this is room 2. And then for room 2 you could redesign it, put in different objects. So let's go to our ground objects. So on the right hand side here you've got a list of all the assets. This is called the asset browser. Now this used to be separated into objects, sprites and all the different kind of assets there were, but now you could create your own asset groups. So you could just create one asset group for the player object and put his object, his sprite, any kind of sounds and scripts that are specific to the player object. But we'll just stick to the default views now, which is separated into objects. So we've got here our half ground and our ground objects. So we drag it onto the screen here. You can then position it where you want to. You can also double click it, and then you zoom in using your mouse wheel, which is what I've got set to in settings. You can then edit the object. So as you can see here, it's set as a solid, and we've set the sprite. And then you can also manually set the X, Y position and the scale. So you can make the object larger, like this. But we're going to use the default X and Y scale of 1. So in order to design a room, you're going to use layers. So you can have a different layer for different kind of objects and resources, and then you can also rename the layer. So we can call this one INS objects, because this layer is going to hold all our objects. Should we try it again? Call this one instant solids. So this layer has all our solid ground objects, and then this one will rename it to instant objects, because this one's got all our objects. So that's better. And we can do the same thing in here. So what you can see is each room has got its own layers, and you'll have to rename each layer as you want it, or you can just leave the default layer names. Okay, so now I've set the same layer names, which make it easier when you're using the game maker language, the code, so you can then access You can then, what do you call it, apply functions on different layers. You can reference them in the code using the layer name. Okay, so we've got a room 1 now and we've got a room 2. Just going to have a little redesign of room 2. So we're just going to make room 2 foreground. In order to delete objects, I think the best way is just to select them and see a blue rectangle and then press the delete key like that. Okay, so what we'll do is in room 2 we'll just create like a little hill for it to climb over. So we'll just position the objects. Rather than having to drag it on each time, because this could be a bit time consuming, to drag it one by one, you can press the Alt key and you can then just kind of paste the last used object without having to drag it from the asset browser. So just press the Alt key and then press the left mouse button, and then you can then design your room. Now we use our ground half. Give it a little platform to jump over, and then we'll try to delete some of these. Okay, so we'd have to climb over the hill and go over the platform and then jump onto the ground below here. You can actually reposition and overlap some of the objects like this. Okay, so this is our room 1 and this is our room 2. So we're just going to try to code it so that we can go from room 1 to room 2. So this is a very simple platform game. I've already written the code for the player object. And now the code was written partly using AI, but what I found was that there were a lot of errors, so I had to manually edit and check the code. Right, so let's just add some more ground here because it looks like it's going to fall off. So now our player can jump and then run across here to the other side. And don't forget to always save your project. Now if you click on the top tabs here, you can then go to the workspace. Now in the workspace we have all our objects, and then you can then minimize this to give us more space. So this is where all the coding happens. You can use drag and drop or game maker language. You can use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and then you can also drag it around using the middle mouse button. Press right mouse button to get the menu, and from here you can then select different objects or assets. So we can go to our player object. That's our player object. So here we set the name, the sprite, collision mask, whether it's visible or not, whether it's solid or not, and then things like parents and events and physics. These are all for a bit more advanced, so we can go into a bit more detail in other videos. So in our object, player object, we've got a create event. Now in the create event, we're defining all the variables that are going to be used for its movement. So these are defining the jump, these are defining the movement, these are defining the bullet. Then we've got a step event. Now step event is something that happens every frame. So if your game is, for example, 30 frames per second, you're going to get this step happening 30 times a second. So in the step event, we've got code to check for movement. So what we're doing is checking for the keyboard press events. for letters Q or the arrow keys in order to make it jump, move left or right, and also to fire bullets. Bullets are fired using the space, keyboard check press or space, or keyboard check press VK space, which is basically the same thing, VK space and alt space. And then we've got a global left pressed event. Now I'm just using this for testing purposes. So when we press anywhere on the screen using the left mouse button, it's just going to position the X and Y position of the player object. That's just for debugging. So just give a bit more information about the IDE. So you've got the menu at top. From here you can access all the settings, import projects, logging in. You've got the edit, build, Windows, tools for creating local packages and importing local packages. This can be useful for if you create, for example, an extension or a group of resources, assets. You could export these locally onto your computer and then import them into your new project. The marketplace is obviously very essential. If you're going to be creating any kind of commercial or advanced game or app, you're going to need a marketplace. So we'll just click on it. Click on My Library. Now here you'll see all the assets that you've downloaded from the Yo-Yo Games marketplace. So you've got like the AdMob ads, Amazon in-app purchases, Apple IAPs. You can also download or get hold of music. There's also a lot of Google extensions. These are all official Google extensions made by Yo-Yo Games, as you can see. And these allow you to use features like Firebase cloud messaging, Firebase, Google Play services, Google Play licensing, push notifications. So that's very handy. If you want to view the marketplace and get more extensions and assets, you just click on Open Marketplace. It will then open that for you. And the good thing is you can also create your own extensions for the marketplace and sell them to other users. Okay, so you've got layouts. Layouts is basically how you've kind of structured or designed your IDE. So this is more or less the default setup for the IDE. We've got the asset browser on the right. We've got the room inspector on the left. You can then save and load this. And also show all windows and close all windows. So that's close all the windows. Okay, so GameMaker's manual is now online, so if you need help with any function features, you can just open the manual and then find help on it. And the good thing about the help manual is that it also gives you examples on code usage, so you could basically copy and paste that code and just edit it for your needs. There's also reporting a bug, on basic information about your licensing. Okay, so that's how you basically design. That's just a very brief introduction. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to try and compile it and how it'll play with the game that I've made. So in order to do that, first thing you need to do is you need to go to the right hand side where it says Windows VM default. And I click on the target here, that's the little icon right top right corner. Now you'll see a list of platforms here. Now these are all the platforms that you will have access to. So you can download different modules like Android module, iOS export module, the Mac OS and the Windows. So these you'll have to buy separately depending on what platform you want to develop for. So we click on Windows, that's Windows Desktop, and the output will just choose VM, which is faster, and then device is just going to be a default. So that's all done. And the next thing is you're going to press play. Now what play does, it just runs the game, but it doesn't actually compile it to an exe or anything like that, so it's just in memory. So just press play and you'll see the output window here. So this is where you're going to get information about the game itself, and you'll see any kind of compiler. So if you had any kind of errors with your code, or if there was like a runtime error, you would see the information here. You could then use that to kind of debug and fix the issue. So the game is playing, just let me move it in screen. Okay, so there you go. So what you see now on the screen in the actual game window, so this is the game window, is the zoomed in viewport. So we're only seeing a section of the actual room, and it should be following this player object. So I'm just going to try and move it with the arrow keys. So I'm moving left and right, and then pressing up to jump. So as you can see, the screen has, the camera has moved. So if you go back now, it'll move again. So that's pretty good, but the problem with this is it's only triggering when the player object is too near the end. So you can't really see much past its kind of X position. So we just quickly go back and change that. So we go back to our room 1, go into the room inspector, click on viewports and cameras, and go to the first viewport we set up, and go to the object following, and we're going to change this horizontal border to 200. That should make it trigger a bit faster. We're going to save it and press play. Okay, so let's try it again now. It's going to move the player using the arrow keys just like before, and what you see now is it moves much more quicker. So we can move 200 pixels, but we can actually see a lot more now because it's 200 pixels from the boundary of the viewport. So that's actually better, so we can see a lot more near the edge. So this is a very simple platformer. So you've got a player that's jumping on solid objects, controlled using the arrow keys. So you've got up for jump, and it's a bit buggy because at the moment you can double jump, you can double, triple jump. So as you can see now, we've just walked off the screen, and it doesn't actually go to the next room because we haven't written the code yet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write some code in order to allow the player to go from room 1 to room 2. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the player object in our workspace. We're going to minimize this to get more space, and then we're going to add a new event. Now our event There's actually several ways you could do this, but the easiest way would be to add a new event, go into Other and click on Outside Room. So this event will only trigger when the player object has gone outside the room. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the width of the room, which is 1366, and what we're going to say is if the player's is that what it's called, player object player, if the player's X position is actually greater than 1366, or another way you could do it is you could actually use a variable which is room width. Room width now is going to be a constant which holds the value 1366, and that makes it easier. So now with game make language, you don't really need the brackets here, but you can put them if you want them. So we're just going to set up a simple condition. If the player's X position is greater than the room width, and remember this is in the outside room event, so the player object, so the player has just walked out of the room to the right, and its X position is greater than room width. We then use curly brackets to segment the code, and then we're going to tell it what to do. So it's just a simple function which is room go to. You can either put room go to next, which in our case would work. However, what I found the best way to do it is actually use the reference to the room, which is room 2. Now this argument can be room 2. It can also be a variable with global scope, so you can use it to, you can use something like global dot next room ID. So you could create like a list or a map containing all the room IDs in order to navigate through the levels. So we're just going to go back and put room 2, and that should more or less be it. You just press play again. Okay, so now we're in room 1, we're just going to run across to the other side, run, jump, and we're going to see if it goes to room 2, and there you go. So we're now in room 2, where I created the kind of hill for it to jump off. But in room 2 we can see that we haven't set the boundary for the object following, so it gets too close to the edge. And the other thing now is that if we go left, what you can see is that it doesn't go to room 1, it just falls off the edge of the screen. So let's change those two things. We just copy this code, and then we're going to create an else, and then paste it, and put if the player's X position is less than 0, so it's basically walked out of the room to the left hand side, we're going to go to room 1. However, what you need to remember is this code, this event will trigger in every single room. Whichever room the player is in, this event will trigger in that room. So we need to be careful, because you could walk left and then walk back into room 1. So the way we deal with this is you'd have to then create a select or a switch. So you right click here, click on code snippets, and then you'll see kind of like some snippets for common conditions. So we're going to select switch. It's already filled in the kind of the main things. So what we're going to use is the room think it's the room index. Or if it's just room. So we're going to create a switch. Now what switch does, it takes the variable that you've assigned in switch here in brackets, and then based on what that value is, it will execute different commands. So we're using the case here and a break. So for each option there's going to be a case and a break, and then you're going to have to define the value here. So we're going to use a room, and our room currently only has two different possibilities, which is room 1 and room 2. So we're going to put room 1 and then copy it and then put room 2. Excuse me. So you got room 1 and you got room 2. We don't really need the default, but you could in order to kind of prevent any kind of errors, if you have lots of different rooms and you have not accounted for them, you can have a default. But because we've only got 2 rooms, we can just delete this. And I like to structure and indent the code. This makes it easier to read. Okay, so if the player walks off the screen towards the left, so some x position is less than 0 and the room is room 1, what we're going to do is we're just going to restart the room. So we're just going to go back to room 1. If we're in room 2, we're obviously just going to go to room 1 because that's the previous room. And now what we can do is we can just copy this switch, because we'll be using the same switch in each case, and then paste it here. So now if the player's X position is greater than the room width, so we've walked off on the right hand side and the room is room 1, we're going to go to the next room, which is room 2. If we're in room 2, because we've only got, let me just change that. If we're in room 2 and we walk off the screen towards the right hand side, because that's our last room, you could just like make it the end of the game. So we could put like a message which is show message async, well done, completed the game. So we basically just won because we've gone from room 1 to room 2, and then that's our last room, so we basically just won the game. So we show a message and then that's it. You could also show a question, async, well done, you've completed the game. And then this would then ask you as a question, or you could ask a question yourself, like a restart or quit. So do you want to quit? Now if the user selected yes, you could then end the game, or if they select no, you could restart it. So in order to do that, you would have to use you would need to add an event which is asynchronous and a dialog, because show question is a pop-up dialog, so we're using the asynchronous dialog event here. Now you need to put in some code, so the best thing to do would be go to keyword help, and that would then open the manual online, and then you can just scroll down and get the code. So I'm just copying it on the other screen. You would then go into the async dialog event and then just paste it in there. So the async dialog event, so every time the user walks off the screen on room 2, it's going to get asked a question, a pop-up dialog, and that's going to be like a yes or no or a okay. It's going to be a yes or a no. When the user presses the yes or no button, it will then return what they call a DS map. This is like a structure in memory which holds different values. So you can just copy this from the manual. You don't really need to memorize that. So in this case, it will return a map using the async load and the value ID. And if the we're going to put that into the variable ID, and if the ID is message, and we've actually got a value there which is yes, we're going to end the game. But if they press no, then what we're going to do is we're going to restart the game. So the simple command which is game restart. There you go. In order to make this work, we've got a variable here called MSG. You're going to have to go into the outside room. Whenever you ask a question like show question async, you don't need to, but if you want to basically act on the user's input, you need to assign the return value to a variable. So in this case, we're going to put MSG equals. So whatever the user presses yes or no, that's going to get plugged into the MSG variable. We also need to set a default value. So we're going to create event, and then we're going to set the value to -1. Copy this. So basically, when the user presses it, the async dialog event is going to trigger. It's going to get the ID, and that's going to be equal to MSD. We'll then reset the MSD variable. And then we're going to act on whether the user presses yes or no. So that should work. So let's just try it now. Before we do, let's just go back to room 2. Go to our room inspector, viewports, object following, and I'm going to put 200. I'm going to press play. So we can just test this out now by moving the player. So this is room 1. We're going to move to the edge of the screen and walk off. We're now in room 2, so that's worked. Now we're going to go back, and hopefully it'll take us back to room 1. So now it's worked, but the only problem there is it's taken us back to the original position. So this you can actually code for as well. So that the object is here facing that way. Okay, so we're in room 2 now. We've set the boundary for the object following, so that's worked. And then we're going to jump off and land onto the platform there. And then we're going to walk off. So as you can see, that's worked. So it's walked out of the room or the level, and then it says, well done, you complete the game, do you want to quit? So we're going to try no, and hopefully it should restart. So there you go. So now the game has restarted. Let's try it again, and this time it should quit when we press yes. Jump onto the bottom platform and walk out of the room. And this time we're going to press yes. And as you can see, the game window has just closed and ended. So for the coding for this video, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add one more thing, which is to account for walking back into room 1 from room 2. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into room 2, go to objects, and I'm going to delete the player object. If we go into room 1 and find our player object, we're going to double click it and click on edit. And we're going to make it a persistent object. So it says here, instances of this object will persist between rooms. So we don't need to define the object in every room, we just define it once. So I'm just going to test this out to see how that works. Oops. So this is room 1 again. Just going to walk out into room 2 and hopefully it's not worked. And the reason for that is because its Y position was off the screen. So it's not going to recreate the player object in each room, which we could do. It's actually taking the object from the previous room. So what we're going to do is go back to our player object and go to our outside room and go into the switch. So we walk out the room and it's room 1. You're going to go to room 2 and then we can manually then set the X and Y position. So we can set the X equals and then we can set the Y equals. And in order to do that, we need to go to our room 2 and then just get the position that we want it to be in. So if you look at the bottom here, it says these are the positions in the room. So as you move the mouse around in the room, you can see the coordinates changing there. So we want to place the object here as it walks in. But because we want it in the exact position, let's just drag the player object and let's just zoom in and try and get like an exact there. So you see this grid on the screen. This grid this helps with positioning, but you could change the value of the grid. So you could make it 5 and 5, just make the grid smaller and just make it easier to position the object exactly where you want it to. So when we walk out of room 1 into room 2, we want it to start here in room 2. So we can just position it there, double click it and get its position, which is 25, 635. 25 and 635. 25, 635. So there you go. So when we walk out from room 2, we're going to go room 1, we're going to go to room 2 and then we're going to reposition the player in that spot there. And we can also do the same for going from room 2 to room 1. So it's in here. Now what we need to do here is we need to get the X and Y positions that we want to place the object to. So this time we need to go to room 1 and let's just grab another player object, placing here. This is where we want it to enter room 1. Let's just change the grid to 5 again to get a bit more precision in our positioning, and let's just position it. So it's going to be about here and double click it and we can get the position. So it's 1345 and again 635. So we can leave the Y position, we just need the X position, and then we can delete this object. Now we go back to our player object and we just paste in the Y value here. And there's one last thing, which is the direction. Now the direction of the player, which is like which way it's facing. So if we're going left, we're going to be facing left, and if we're going right, we're going to be facing right. That's done using the image X scale, because if we put a negative, it basically flips the sprite on its I think it's vertical axis. So we can actually make it facing right and left. So in this case, when the user presses the left key, the sprite is mirrored, so it's facing the left using image X scale equals -1. So that's what we want. So we're going to copy that and go to our outside room event. Now when the player walks off the screen to the left and we get the room ID and it matches room 2, we position this player object using X and Y coordinates, and then we're also going to flip it or mirror its sprite using image X scale equals -1. I'm pretty sure that should work, so let's just try it out. You'll find with developing there's a lot of trial and error. You'll have to keep going back and forth just to see if the code has worked. So we're in room 1, so we're going to walk off to the right and we end up in room 2. So we basically started room 2 where we positioned it in code. So this time the start position is defined using code and not the room editor. So now let's test the other thing which we did, which was going from room 2 to room 1, walking left. So there you go. So it's facing the right way and it's also in room 1 at the right place. So we can now walk from room 2 to room 1. And as you can see, it wasn't very difficult at all. It was like, a few lines of code, but using those few lines of code we can then change room. You could have a bit more control over this, so you can have like a transition effect. You could also use different variables, because at the moment it's a very simple platformer. In each room you're going to have like enemies and objects, so you would have to make sure that you account for going from different rooms. A good way to do this is using persistent objects so that it's only created once. So there you go, so that works. And then the last thing we did, or we can just check again, is going out this way. So that works. Let's just try one more thing, which is when it walks off and falls into a hole, that's more or less going to be at the end of the game. It's a game over, or you're going to lose a life. So we haven't really set up life, so we're just going to have a simple game over. So the best thing to do is use the outside room event again, and this will account for it going down and off the screen. So this is going to be our first check. So we put a new condition here and then put an else. What we're going to do is we're going to check the player's Y position, and we're going to check if it's greater than the room height. So as the player falls into the hole, its Y position is obviously going to be greater than room height. So we'll know that this condition will then return true. And what we're going to do is here we're going to show a message. You can use show message or show message async, but if you're building a game for mobile phones, you will have to use async. which is best practice now. We can just put game over. And again, we're gonna have to use a variable, and we could put we call it game over. Give it a default value now, create event, just like we did before. So we're gonna call it game over equals -1. Go back to outside room. So when the player walks, falls into the hole, we're just going to show a message saying game over. Do you want to try again? So let's change this into a question, which is better. And then we're going to exit. Another way you could do this is have a control object in a room which handles all the dialogues, and then what you would do then is, if the player walks into the hole or into a trap and it's game over, you would show a message using this variable here in a different object, in the control object, and then you would destroy the player object so that it doesn't actually execute any events, because the player has actually died. But in our case, we make it a simple game. So we've got show question async, game over, do you want to try again? So we need to go to the async dialog event and then copy the same kind of structure here. Copy that code and then put an else in, because each time the ID is only going to be one of two things. So it's either going to be MSD or game over. So if the ID matches game over, we'll just reset the value to -1. And now in this case, we've asked the question. The question was, do you want to try again? Do you want to try again? So this is what's returned when you press yes. We get async load status. So in this one, we're going to have to switch these around. Game restart, put that in here, and you take the game end and we'll move it down here. So what does this do? If we get the user walks out of the room, that's game over. They're gonna be told game over. They're gonna get asked if they want to try again. So basically restart the game. That's going to the dialog return is going to get entered into game over variable. We then check the game over variable here. If they press yes, we're going to restart the game. If they press no, we're going to restart. So we're going to end the game here, game end. So let's just try that now. So I'm just going to make the player walk into the hole, and it should be game over. So there you go. So game over. Do you want to try again? If you press yes, it should restart. There you go. So that's restarted. And if you press no, it'll end the game. So again, that's just a few lines of code. Basically just one line of code here. You don't really need this. One line of code there, and then a few lines of code which you just copied from the previous code here. And you just create one more variable, which is game over variable, and that will handle your game over events. So you can use that whether the player walks or falls into a hole, or whether they get shot or killed or fall onto some spikes, for example. So we've got the player, we can walk from room 1 to room 2, we can walk from room 2 to room 1. We've added the game over when it falls into a hole, and we've also created the game over event. So let's just see if it works in room 2 as well. Let's just jump into the hole, and there you go, so it's game over. Takes us back to room 1. Yeah, so this is what you see if you get an error while you're debugging. This error message or pop-up, you can disable it and use your own kind of error handling system, but while you're debugging, this is the best way. So it's telling us like the error problem which occurred in the step event of object player. Instant create layer instances does not exist. Now this is because we renamed some of the layers. So to fix this problem, we go to our room 1. And then we get the name of the layer by copying it from here. And we go into our workspace and I'll go into step event. This is where it handles the space bar. So this is a code here which is causing a problem. When we press spacebar, it was creating a layer, or it was creating an instance of the bullet object. However, the layer instances didn't exist, so this was causing the problem. So we just put in our own layer name, which is ins objects. So this is the layer that we renamed, which is going to have all the objects in it. So what this code does is, when the user presses spacebar, we create a new instance, which is like an actual sprite on the screen. So that's called an instance of the object called bullet on the layer called instant objects. We set the default value of the X and Y. So we're just using the X and Y position of the player. Once it's created, the index or the ID of that instance is stored in the variable bullet, which is a local variable. We then assign the direction and the speed. So bullet.direction is the direction the bullet's going in, and the bullet.speed is the speed of the bullet. Now bullet direction is changed depending on whether you're walking left or right. So it can either be 180 or 0. So if you're walking left, it's 180. The directions are in degrees, starting at 0, but 0 is facing this way on the right hand side of the screen, and the direction goes, I think it's anti-clockwise. So it starts off at 0 and then it goes round anti-clockwise to 180, 90, and then further down to 180, then further down to 270, then back around to 360 and 0. So that's how the direction works in GameX Studio. It goes from 0, which is the kind of right, and that goes up to 90, which is up, 180, which is left, and 270, which is down. So we're setting the value of bullet direction whenever the user presses left or right. There's different ways you can do this actually, but this is a simple enough way. So we can try this now and it should hopefully work. So we're going to press spacebar and fire a bullet. So as you can see, it works. So, and the bullet direction is dependent on which way we're facing. So we can now fire bullets out. Okay, so there you go. So in our next tutorial, what I'll do is I'll add some what we call enemies or villains in the game. We're going to give them simple movements or AI, and we're going to be adding code to allow the player to either kill them or get killed by them. Thanks for watching, and please, if you could subscribe to my channel and also share with your friends.